I never thought a quiet suburban street could feel so hostile. My house sat at the end of Maplewood Lane, a modest two-story home with a neatly trimmed lawn and a driveway that I took pride in. Every morning, I would open the garage door, hop into my car, and drive to work without a second thought. But that routine ended the day my driveway disappeared. Not literally, of course, but practically. It started innocuously enough. A brand new SUV, shiny, black, with dark tinted windows, appeared parked across my driveway one morning. At first, I thought it was a visitor of one of my neighbors. I peered across the street to see if anyone was around, but no one waved, no one knocked, and no one even looked remotely apologetic. I left a polite note on the windshield. "Please move your car. This is my driveway. Thank you." By the afternoon, the SUV had not moved. And when I returned home that evening, there it sat, like a silent, mocking blockade. My heart sank. I knocked on doors, rang doorbells, and even called the non-existent number on the license plate frame. A useless gesture, I realized later. No response. The next morning, it was worse. 2 cars now blocked the driveway, 1 SUV and a silver sedan. It was clearly deliberate. My neighbors, most of them friendly, looked away whenever I approached. A few even pretended not to see. That's when the fear started to creep in. This wasn't just about a blocked driveway. This was personal. I remembered the new neighbors who had moved in 2 houses down last month, the Carters. No one knew much about them, but rumor had it they had a taste for confrontation. Could they be behind this? I shook the thought off. Surely it was just coincidence, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The blocking continued for days. I couldn't leave for work without climbing over curbs or parking blocks. I tried calling the local police, hoping for a quick resolution. The officer who finally answered was polite, almost too polite. "Sir," he said after listening to my complaint, "it's technically a civil matter. We can't tow someone's car unless it's causing a hazard." A hazard? I thought. My driveway was literally part of my property. I felt trapped in my own home. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blocked driveway through the window. My mind raced. I thought of every possible solution. Confrontation, legal action, even calling a tow truck on my own. But I hesitated. There was something about this situation that screamed danger, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to provoke whoever was behind it. Days turned into a week, and the cars never moved. Every morning, I woke to the same unyielding blockade. My frustration grew into rage. The neighbors whispered among themselves when they thought I wasn't looking, casting secret glances at the Carter's house. I began to notice subtle things. A paper left on my doorstep that wasn't there before, faint tire tracks on the grass beside my driveway, and once a low laugh echoing late at night. Then one morning, everything changed. I was pacing back and forth, debating whether to skip work entirely, when I saw a car slowly pull up to the street. It wasn't the usual SUVs or sedans. This car was official looking, a white vehicle with city insignia on the door and a small light on top. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be a city inspector? A man stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing a crisp uniform. He looked around the block with a practiced eye, taking notes, snapping pictures. I ran down the driveway to meet him. "Good morning," I called out, trying to mask my desperation with politeness. "Are you here about the blocked driveway?" He looked at me, his expression neutral but sharp. "Possibly. I'm the city inspector assigned to property disputes in this area. I received a complaint about access obstruction." My pulse quickened. Yes, that's exactly it. For days, my driveway has been deliberately blocked, and the neighbors won't help. The police said it's a civil matter, but I can't even leave my home. He nodded slowly. "I see. Let me take a look." As he approached the driveway, I held my breath. The inspector's eyes scanned the cars, the curb, and the narrow space between them. Then something surprising happened. He picked up his radio, spoke briefly, and immediately, the drivers of the SUVs, my tormentors, appeared at the scene, fuming, arguing, clearly caught off guard. "You can't do this," one of them shouted. "We live here too." The inspector raised his hand calmly. "I'm aware of your claim, but property laws are clear. Blocking a driveway is a violation. These vehicles must be removed immediately. I stood frozen, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over me. For days, I had felt powerless, trapped by sheer audacity and malice. And now, in the presence of authority, everything changed. The drivers reluctantly moved their cars, muttering under their breath, their arrogance fading as the inspector documented everything. I felt a strange satisfaction, not in revenge, but in justice finally being served. The city inspector gave me a few tips, explained my rights, and left, leaving me staring at my cleared driveway. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But as I looked back at the Carter's house, I realized that this wasn't over. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by thinly veiled fury. And I knew that someone who went to such lengths to block a driveway wouldn't give up so easily. I stepped into my car, the morning sun glinting off the freshly polished hood. For the first time, I drove down Maplewood Lane without obstruction. And as I drove, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan not for confrontation, but for a clever comeback that would ensure that no one would ever underestimate me again. The day after the inspector had cleared my driveway, I woke up feeling lighter, almost as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But the relief was fleeting. I had learned something crucial. The Carters weren't just rude. They were strategic. They didn't act recklessly. They acted with purpose. And I realized that if I didn't respond thoughtfully, this blockade might only be the beginning. I spent the morning inspecting the driveway and the surrounding area. Every inch of asphalt, every curb, every patch of grass seemed to hold a clue. Tire marks from the SUVs were still faintly visible, and the grass where the cars had squeezed past was flattened, a subtle testament to their disregard. As I observed, I noticed a small pile of dirt behind the sedans, which seemed deliberately placed to restrict movement. I decided to take notes, not just about the driveway, but about the Carters themselves. Observing, documenting, strategizing, that would be my defense. That evening, I caught sight of Mr. Carter himself peering through the blinds, his eyes sharp, suspicious, calculating. He saw me looking, and our gazes met for a tense moment before he retreated. I realized then that he expected me to react angrily, to escalate, to make a mistake. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled faintly to myself, a subtle acknowledgement that I had begun a quiet game, a game of patience, observation, and cunning. I started small. I ensured my car was parked slightly differently each day, sometimes leaving small, obvious obstacles in my own driveway to gauge how they would respond. At first, nothing. Then, subtle signs of annoyance appeared. I could see them through the window. Frustrated sighs, whispered arguments, one of the Carters even muttering something under his breath. But I wasn't done. I needed leverage. That evening, I decided to walk the neighborhood, chatting casually with the neighbors, gathering little pieces of information. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Whitman, mentioned in passing that she had overheard the Carters complaining about zoning violations and property lines. Another neighbor hinted that they had recently had a fine for illegally parking on the street during construction. Pieces were falling into place. It became clear they weren't untouchable. They had weaknesses, and I intended to find them. Over the next few days, I continued my quiet surveillance. I documented every detail, the time they left their house, the visitors they had, even the pattern of trash collection. All of it would serve a purpose later. I also made subtle improvements to my own property, security cameras, motion lights, and even a discreet no parking sign at the end of my driveway. Nothing confrontational, just preparation. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, I was reviewing the footage for my new cameras when I noticed something striking. Mr. Carter had been leaving and returning at odd hours, sometimes with unfamiliar men. Their movements were secretive, and occasionally, a van would arrive, unloaded with heavy items, and then quickly disappear. My gut told me something shady was happening. I knew I needed proof, but I couldn't confront them directly. That would be reckless. Instead, I decided to play the long game. I continued documenting, taking notes, photos, and even discreet recordings of the sounds around my property. Days turned into a week, and the pattern became undeniable. The Carters were up to something illegal, something that went beyond just petty revenge with parked SUVs. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. One night, as I was reviewing my camera footage, I saw two figures moving in the dark, carrying what looked like construction equipment toward the neighboring empty lot. I zoomed in. It wasn't equipment for the lot. It was stolen materials from a nearby construction site. My heart raced. This was the breakthrough I needed. The next morning, I called the city inspector back, giving him a detailed account of my observations. He listened carefully, taking notes, and promised to investigate. I felt a wave of satisfaction. The inspector had given me hope, but I knew this was just the beginning. The Carters, of course, were oblivious to my preparations. They continued their petty provocations, parking close to the curb, leaving notes with thinly veiled threats, and smirking when I passed by. But behind the smirk, I could sense unease. My cameras, my documentation, my careful observation, it was a silent warning they couldn't see. I decided to escalate my own subtle retaliation. I began leaving small, strategic obstacles on my driveway, nothing illegal, just enough to make it inconvenient if anyone tried to block me again. Small cones, temporary barriers, even a harmless warning sign about towing that I placed just at the edge of my property. Every day, I made minor adjustments, keeping the Carters guessing. And then the city inspector returned. This time, he brought a team, and they conducted a thorough inspection not just of my driveway, but of the entire block. Streets were measured, property lines confirmed, and every vehicle in the immediate area noted. The Carters were furious, and it was obvious they had no defense. "You can't keep doing this," Mr. Carter shouted, his face red with anger. "This is harassment." The inspector, calm and authoritative, replied, "Sir, blocking a driveway is a violation of city code. We have documentation and witnesses. Any further obstruction will result in fines and possible towing." I watched silently, satisfaction bubbling beneath the surface. Justice, it seemed, was finally catching up. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Carters were clever, vindictive, and dangerous in their own subtle ways. I had won the first round, but the battle was far from over. In the following days, I noticed a change. The Carters' smirks were gone, replaced by careful observation. They watched my movements, whispered in hushed tones, and seemed more cautious. My quiet retaliation, combined with the authority of the city inspector, had shifted the power dynamic. I continued documenting, preparing for any eventuality, but also allowed myself small victories, like parking in my driveway without obstruction, or receiving a friendly nod from neighbors who had witnessed the inspector's authority in action. One evening, as I sat on my porch, reflecting on the past weeks, I realized something. Patience, preparation, and careful observation had given me control. The Carters' arrogance had been their weakness, and I had turned it against them without confrontation. I had become a silent force in my own home, a presence they could neither predict nor intimidate. And yet, I knew the final chapter was still ahead. The Carters would not give up easily, and their next move could be more aggressive, more calculated. I would need every ounce of cunning and every bit of evidence I had collected to ensure that when the time came, I would not just defend my driveway, but expose the full extent of their audacity to the city, the neighbors, and perhaps even the law. For now, though, I could breathe. The driveway was mine. The authority of the city inspector had tipped the scales. And I had learned a valuable lesson. Power often lies not in confrontation, but in observation, preparation, and knowing exactly when to act. I watched the street calm under the golden glow of the evening sun, the once threatening SUVs now parked politely elsewhere. My neighbors waved as they passed by, some with newfound respect, others with curiosity. And in that quiet moment, I felt a sense of victory, not one born of anger, but of patience, strategy, and quiet determination. The Carters' next move would come, I was certain. But when it did, I would be ready. And this time, the surprise would be mine. The calm on Maplewood Lane was deceiving. For a few days, the street seemed peaceful. My driveway remained free of obstruction, the neighbors nodded politely, and the city inspector had given me reassurance that any further violations would be dealt with swiftly. I allowed myself a brief sense of victory, but I knew better than to underestimate the Carters. They were not the kind to give up easily. In fact, I had a sinking feeling that they were planning something bigger, something that would not be solved by polite warnings or city ordinances. My suspicion was confirmed one evening when I returned from work to find my mailbox ripped open and scattered letters across the lawn. Among the disorganized pages, there was a threatening note written in messy, capital letters. Watch your back. This isn't over. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just petty annoyance anymore. This was escalation. I gathered the papers, photographed them, and immediately reported the incident to the city inspector. He listened gravely. Intimidation is serious, he said. Document everything. If this continues, it may rise to criminal behavior. I knew I had to act carefully. The Carters were trying to provoke me, hoping I would make a rash move that would give them an advantage. But I had learned patience. I would not rise to their bait. Instead, I doubled down on my strategy: observation, documentation, and leverage. That night, I reviewed my camera footage and noticed something unusual. The Carters' SUVs were gone from their usual spots. The street was quiet, almost eerily so. I felt a sudden unease. Then, around midnight, I saw two figures approaching my driveway. I could barely make them out, but their movements were deliberate, cautious, clearly not casual passers-by. I grabbed my phone and quietly dialed the city inspector's emergency line. I didn't want a direct confrontation, but I wanted backup if it escalated. I also activated all my motion lights and cameras. The figures stopped at the edge of my driveway. One of them reached into the vehicle and began moving something heavy, something that could block the driveway again. I held my breath, waiting. Then, the city inspector's team arrived, quietly, efficiently, as if they had been expecting trouble. The Carters froze. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, realizing that I had anticipated this move. Step away from the vehicle, the inspector commanded. His voice was calm but firm. This is a violation. You are being documented. The Carters hesitated, then reluctantly complied. The inspector recorded everything: photographs, notes, and verbal statements. I stood at the edge of my property, my heart pounding, but I did not intervene. I had done the hard work earlier. Now, the law would act. After the incident, the inspector spoke to me privately. You've handled this well, he said. By documenting everything and staying calm, you've created a solid case. If they try anything again, it won't just be a civil violation. It could lead to fines, towing, or even criminal charges. I exhaled deeply. Relief, yes, but also a surge of satisfaction. Every note, every photograph, every quiet observation had paid off. I had taken the power back, not through confrontation, but through foresight and strategy. The next day, the Carters appeared at a city hearing. The inspector presented my documentation, timestamps, photos, footage, and the threatening note. They tried to argue, protested, even claimed I was exaggerating, but the evidence was undeniable. The city ruled in my favor. The Carters were fined, and orders were issued prohibiting them from blocking or intimidating me in any way. The neighborhood, which had watched the drama unfold from the sidelines, seemed to shift in response. Neighbors who had been passive before now approached me with smiles and small gestures of approval. I realized that the power of patience, preparation, and strategic observation not only protected my property, but also earned the respect of those around me. But the climax was yet to come. The Carters, humiliated and furious, had one last desperate attempt. Late one night, I noticed movement on my cameras. They had attempted to remove a small gate I had installed at the edge of my driveway. They underestimated my vigilance. I called the police immediately, and when they arrived, the Carters were caught red-handed. This time, there was no room for argument. Criminal charges were filed. As I watched them being led away, a strange mixture of relief and vindication washed over me. Justice had been served, not through anger or retaliation, but through careful observation, patience, and strategic action. My driveway, my home, my peace of mind, everything had been restored. I stood on the porch, the street quiet, the golden light of morning breaking over Maplewood Lane. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly safe, truly victorious. And as I looked around at the neighborhood, I realized that power didn't always belong to the loudest or the most aggressive. Sometimes, it belonged to the patient, the observant, the prepared. The Carters' reign of intimidation was over, and I had not only defended my property, but had also uncovered the lengths to which they would go to assert control. It was a lesson in strategy, in patience, and in the quiet strength that comes from preparation and foresight. As I pulled into my driveway that morning, unblocked, unthreatened, I smiled. The battle had been long, the stakes high, but the outcome clear. And in that moment, I knew that no one would ever underestimate me, or my driveway, again. After the chaos of the previous weeks, life on Maplewood Lane slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The SUVs that had once blocked my driveway were gone. The Carters had been fined and were facing legal consequences, and the neighborhood, which had been tense and wary, seemed to exhale collectively. But for me, the aftermath was more than just a return to routine. It was an opportunity to reflect on everything that had happened. I spent the first morning in weeks enjoying the peace. I stepped out onto my driveway, now completely clear, the asphalt warm under my feet in the early sunlight. My neighbors waved as they walked past, some stopping to ask if I was okay, others just smiling knowingly. It felt strange at first, to see them looking at me with respect rather than sympathy. But it also felt reassuring. The ordeal had changed more than just the Carters. It had shifted the dynamic of the entire street. The Carters, meanwhile, became the subject of quiet conversation among neighbors. Their once bold and arrogant demeanor had vanished. Rumors circulated about the legal consequences they were now facing, about the fines that had drained their accounts, and the criminal charges for harassment that would follow if they attempted anything further. For the first time, the neighborhood saw them for what they truly were, not powerful or untouchable, but reckless and short-sighted. For me, the lessons were even more personal. I realized that patience, careful planning, and documentation had been far more powerful than anger or confrontation. Every photograph, every note, every observation had contributed to my ultimate success. I had discovered a strength I hadn't fully appreciated before, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to strategize quietly, and to take control without escalating conflict. I also made some lasting changes to my property. Security cameras were permanently installed. The driveway was repainted and resealed, and small improvements around the edges ensured that no one could even attempt to block it without being noticed immediately. But beyond the physical upgrades, I had gained confidence, a sense that I could handle challenges without losing composure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the street, I received a visit from Mrs. Whitman, the elderly neighbor who had first tipped me off about the Carters' suspicious behavior. She handed me a small plate of cookies and smiled warmly. "You handled everything so well," she said. "Most people would have lost their temper or given up, but you stayed calm and smart. That's something the rest of us can learn from." Her words struck a chord. I realized that this experience had not just been about a driveway. It had been about asserting one's rights, standing up to intimidation, and finding strength in strategy rather than in force. I had protected my home, but I had also set an example for my neighbors, showing that courage and patience often speak louder than confrontation. As weeks turned into months, the Carters' presence on Maplewood Lane faded. Their legal troubles and the community's awareness ensured they kept a low profile. Meanwhile, the neighborhood regained its quiet charm. Children played in the street without fear, neighbors talked openly across fences, and the small sense of community that had been threatened by the Carters' actions was restored. For me, there was a profound sense of closure. I had faced a challenge that seemed small on the surface, a blocked driveway, but had grown into something much larger, testing patience, strategy, and resolve. I had learned not just how to defend my property, but also how to approach conflict in a measured, intelligent way. And in doing so, I had found a new sense of confidence that extended far beyond the driveway itself. One morning, while sipping coffee on the porch, I watched my car drive smoothly into the driveway without obstruction. I smiled to myself. What had once been a source of frustration and anger had become a symbol of personal growth and triumph. I realized that sometimes the greatest victories are quiet, unseen by the world, and yet deeply felt. The city inspector stopped by one last time, this time with a friendly wave rather than official business. "You handled this well," he said, smiling. "It's rare to see someone so patient and thorough. Most people would have escalated unnecessarily. You've set a standard." I thanked him, feeling a mix of pride and relief. The inspector's acknowledgement reinforced what I had learned through the ordeal. Calm intelligence and careful preparation often yield far better results than aggression. As I reflected on the entire saga, I understood that the Carters' attempt to intimidate me had backfired spectacularly. Their arrogance and lack of foresight had been their undoing. And for me, the experience had been transformative, not just a battle over a driveway, but a lesson in resilience, strategy, and the quiet power of patience. The driveway, once blocked and contested, had become a symbol of victory and personal growth. I had faced adversity, observed carefully, acted strategically, and, most importantly, maintained my composure. I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I could face them with the same quiet determination and intelligence that had carried me through this ordeal. And so, Maplewood Lane returned to its peaceful rhythm. The Carters faded into the background, their schemes exposed and halted. Neighbors greeted one another without fear or tension. And I, standing on my porch, looking at my driveway, my territory, my victory, felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace. The story of a blocked driveway had begun as a simple nuisance, but it had grown into a lesson in strategy, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from facing challenges with intelligence and foresight. I had emerged victorious, not through force or anger, but through careful preparation and unwavering resolve. In the end, the driveway was more than just a place to park my car. It was a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the face of deliberate obstruction and intimidation, patience and strategy can turn the tide, and that justice, when combined with vigilance and intelligence, always prevails.